I think the main points that businesses need to take into account with the introduction of the VAT package on the 1st of January from a VAT recovery point of view is, from an administrative perspective, the actual mechanism of making the claim in the introduction of the new electronic portals to submit claims. From a commercial point of view, I think there's 5 key issues that they need to take into account. They need to ensure that the VAT has been correctly charged by the supplier. They need a system in place to challenge that VAT if it's incorrectly charged and gain a refund from the supplier. They need to review their contracts with their existing VAT recovery providers to make sure that they're appropriate. They need to consider registration, because that may be the most appropriate option to gain recovery. And finally, they need to review current claims in other member states to establish their status and whether there are any issues with them. In my experience, it's that the VAT has been incorrectly charged by the supplier. The issue is that if the VAT has not been charged correctly, the member state won't make a refund, and it's necessary for the business to go back to the supplier in order to get a credit note and get the VAT back in that way. That can often take a considerable amount of time. It's also necessary to remember that there can be penalties and interest charged if incorrect claims are made, so it's essential that businesses get it right first time. My advice always to a business is that when you receive an invoice, you should be critically challenging whether the VAT has been charged correctly, especially now that we've moved to a general rule where VAT shouldn't be the norm, it should be an exception. So have a system in place which means that if you get an invoice with foreign VAT, you question it, you then only accept it if you're happy that it's been correctly charged. That's going to minimise your cash flow impact. It's also going to minimise the cost of recovering that VAT. Often it's possible to make fairly minor changes in order to identify incorrectly charged VAT and then make sure that you get the VAT back much quicker. You don't have to wait for the tax authority to make repayment under the 8th directive, and you also make an immediate and ongoing saving, absolute saving, in relation to the commission costs, which you no longer have to pay because you've relieved the VAT at source, which has always got to be the best option. I think the larger accountancy practices have tended to focus on issues within a country rather than cross-border issues, so they haven't really picked up on this area. Also, they see 8th directive and the incorrect charging of VAT as primarily a compliance issue, so it's something that they would leave to the specialist VAT recovery providers. In our experience, there's millions of euros being paid in unnecessary commission when small changes could result in those claims being eliminated completely. Our practice, and the practice that I've always adopted, is to challenge whether the VAT has been charged properly in the first place, because that's the best solution for the company. If they can remove the need to make an 8th directive claim, they remove the cash flow cost of having to fund that VAT until it's repaid by the tax authority. They remove the commission costs, not only for that first year, but also ongoing. So it's a much better result for the company. And I think it comes back down to looking at an individual business and seeking the best solution for them, rather than trying to apply a one-size-fits-all solution to all companies. I think many businesses too easily dismiss the option of VAT registration. They see it as something that needs to be avoided at all costs, whereas in reality, registration can be the most appropriate and cost-effective route to recovery. It's necessary to make sure that you've got the right contract in place with your service provider, because we've seen examples of businesses being registered for VAT and then having to pay the same commission rate as for an 8th directive claim on recovery of VAT through overseas registrations, which is a much simpler process. So, for example, one recent example was seeing €100,000 being paid for the submission of 4 returns, which is clearly not a good deal for the business concerned. I think the new rules will lead to great improvements for businesses. Many businesses in the past haven't submitted claims because the 8th directive was cumbersome and slow moving. They didn't see any point in making a claim when it was so difficult to make the claim. The new rules will make it much easier. There's much more accountability for the tax authorities. They have a clear deadline by which they have to make repayments. They also have to pay interest if they don't meet that deadline. So it's a much better deal for the taxpayer than in the past. Many countries at the moment have got an interest payable system, and there's a considerable amount of interest which is currently due. One thing we would recommend is for businesses to review the 8th directive claims that they've submitted historically. They can do that by contacting the tax authorities in the various countries and asking them for details of all of the claims that have been made to date and the current status of those claims. If they use a VAT recovery provider at the moment, they can ask that provider to do the same thing. The key point is that if there are issues with claims made historically, they want to know about them now so they can take appropriate action. I think the introduction of the VAT package on the 1st of January means that businesses need to consider 5 key things in relation to VAT recovery. They need to make sure that the VAT's been correctly charged in the first place. They need to have a system in place to challenge incorrectly charged VAT and get that VAT back from suppliers. They need to review contracts with existing VAT recovery providers and make sure they're appropriate. They need to consider registration in other member states, because that might be the best option. They also need to review the existing claims, contact tax authorities and establish whether there's any issues with those claims.